Good evening and welcome to Queeries. I am Brian, your host, and with me this evening I have the LGBTQ plus History Steering Committee. So before we really kind of dig deeply in, why don't we just have you introduce who you are and kind of are you from here, that sort of thing. So Jerry, I think you can start.
I'm Jerry Malacote. I was born and raised in Springboro, just south of Dayton. So I sort of grew up in this area. I'm 58 years old and I live in Miamisburg currently.
Awesome.
I'm Melissa Rodriguez. I'm retired Air Force. I retired at Wright Pat, so I grew up in Southern California, and I'm 48, and now I live in Dayton, Ohio.
Great.
The city.
I'm Jim McKinnon. I grew up in Bellbrook, Ohio. Pretty much spent my whole life in the Dayton area. I'm 46, and now I live in Dayton, Miami Township.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, and I'm 29. I'm just going to go on the record as saying that. It was my 18th anniversary in January. It's fantastic.
Gotcha.
So, as most people are aware, at least within the gay community, and you know, quite possibly in the people that are in the know outside of the gay community, that this year was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which is pretty much identified as the real starting point for the gay rights movement that we have seen in the modern era, going all the way back to 1969. That's not to say that there wasn't anything going on prior to that, but one of the things that I have found rather astounding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is how woefully uneducated even the gay community happens to be with regard to our own history. So sort of as a starting point with that, was that kind of what generated this, the need for this steering committee and the creation of this group?
That was part of it, certainly. One of the things that we've talked a lot about in our group and with some of the other steering committee members who aren't able to be with us today is the importance of just what you talked about, that we need to have an understanding of our history. It's vitally important because so often when you look at history sort of for our general population in our country, LGBTQ people tend to get marginalized, pushed into the shadows. Often we're that sort of eccentric person who just sort of was kind of there on the sidelines, that sort of thing. But often what we know is that we were integral to history. When you think about some of the really major movements in our history, LGBTQ people have been right there on the front lines helping to advance equality or civil rights or whatever issue, whether it's entertainment or politics. We've always been there, but our stories haven't always been told because people didn't want to talk about who we were. So that was a big part of it. The 50th anniversary of Stonewall was also a motivator. One of the organizations that I'm involved with that's a sponsoring organization is Rainbow Elder Care of Greater Dayton. And they focus on helping to affirm and improve the lives of older LGBTQ people. And so we'd had a lot of discussion over the last couple of years within the organization about the fact that the Stonewall anniversary was coming up, and because our focus is on older LGBTQ people, what would we do to commemorate that? What would we be doing to be sure that on a local level that we are affirming our history?
Right, excellent. Now, I think also one of the things that people might find interesting is, where you have it's the herstory/history as far as that goes. So why was it important to actually, add herstory instead of just history?
Yeah, I think one of the things like some of us in the steering committee talked about, especially at the beginning, was the lesbian history and how the lesbian history and the gay history is kind of had separate movements coming up and separate scenes, even in all the communities, including the Dayton area. So it was real important to kind of like separate that out so that people can know we were trying to get the lesbian stories as well, particularly having their voices heard. Because as Jerry was saying, the lesbian movement is also in the women's equality movement as well. Real integral in that too, and so helping to just kind of highlight that and vet that out.
Well, and exactly. Again, being a marginalized group, and like in your case, you're kind of like a trifecta, I would say.
Yeah.
In terms of, minority, minority, minority.
Yeah.
And so that makes it even, I think even more important.
Yes.
And, even with regard to, you hear a lot of controversy. Now, again, this is just me speaking as a gay man about, gay people of color that get marginalized even within the gay community, which just frankly astounds me to no end. But so I think it's very important for that. And I think one of the other things, again, because there are going to be some subsequent episodes where we're going to be talking about the history of the AIDS, crisis in America, that sort of thing. It was the lesbian community that really rallied around, the gay male community, helping nurture them and care for them, when no one else would. And again, I think that's something that a lot of people just really have no clue about.
Right.
In terms of, again, speaking historically, has, in your mind, how does Dayton kind of rank in terms of how the LGBTQ plus community has been sort of treated over the course of time?
So I became involved in the project kind of after it started, but when I was in grad school at Wright State, a project that I did was an oral history project of gays and lesbians in Dayton. Not necessarily grew up in Dayton, but lived here now. Part of the motivating factor for that project was in 2015, Dayton was named the queerest city by The Advocate magazine. So I wanted to know why,
Right.
what was behind this. So doing research, of course, things were happening in San Francisco, things were happening in New York, but things were happening in the middle of the country also. So I wanted to see what was happening here. Why was Dayton overall welcoming for the most part, even historically? So I think things that were happening in Dayton all along. Dayton was from what I've heard, what I found out, my project was broken up into 3 different segments. People who came out prior to 1960, people who came out from like 60 something to mid or late 70s, early 80s. And then after that. So, different things were happening at those periods. It was considered a crime and an illness to be gay. You had AIDS, and then, after AIDS, basically.
Right.
So, I think Dayton historically has been kind of on the, cutting edge of gay rights or acceptance of people that aren't straight white men.
Right.
So I think we're going to pull those stories out, and we're going to get a lot of, a lot of history of the area, and see how Dayton really has been all these years.
When I think, what also is kind of interesting, I mean, we technically live in what would be considered a flyover state, I call them the coastal gays, and
We're the Great Lakes gays.
the Great Lakes gays, exactly. There we go, the Great Lakes gays. And it is astounding that they think that, we're all out here farming and,
Right.
raising cattle or whatever. But just from from your own collective history, in your mind, where has Dayton been in terms of, I guess, sort of when you have the coastal trends and then you've got the interior? So has Dayton sort of grown into a more, or this entire region, I'll say, has it grown into a more important piece, in terms of the gay rights movement? Or are we still just considered like these yokels that, for lack of a better way of putting it, I mean, I had someone call me a yokel. It was from New York. And I'm like, well, this yokel has a 1,500 square foot home compared to your 150 square foot whatever,
absolutely.
So screw you.
Yeah. Well, I think at least from when I talk to the coastal gays that I know, especially I'm from California, so, it's interesting because a lot of the publicity we've got over the years being on a lot of these lists, it's gotten an eye-opener because you have these big, cities that everybody expects, like Chicago and LA, and then you got Dayton, Ohio, and I've had people message me when they see these like things, they're like, what is going on there? Like I said, well, yeah, this is one of the reasons I stayed here in Dayton, because of some of the non-discrimination policies that are put in place. We may be in a state that still needs some movement, but Dayton, Ohio has tried, at least over the years. And we had went down to Cincinnati to see a lesbian archives down there, and she pulled out a Dayton folder, and in that was a proclamation from Clay Dixon in 1993, basically supporting, National Coming Out Day, which all of us were like, wow, because National Coming Out Day wasn't,
Right.
It was only a few years before that. It was actually a movement that started across the different states. So to see Dayton, Ohio have a proclamation in 1993 was pretty neat.
And I think Yellow Springs also has, I want to say that Yellow Springs was like early on, they were like super pro-gay,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think to help answer your question, I think we can point to the universities in this area, and in particular, if you think about Greene County and over in Yellow Springs, you have Antioch,
Right.
Wilberforce, universities that were founded on the concept of equality and civil rights.
Yep.
And so I think there's been a foundation, a bedrock of thought and belief and philosophy in the area. But then I think when you couple that with Dayton's history, at one time being home to several Fortune 500 companies,
Sure.
so you were bringing in people who were highly educated, and with the universities that we have here, it does generate sort of a culture, sort of a philosophy. But then I think you also can couple that with of having a very strong labor community here.
Sure.
So, for example, one of the people whose story we have captured through this process is someone who was instrumental in getting the UAW and some of the other auto unions to provide domestic partner benefits, and was pretty instrumental in making that happen right here in Dayton, Ohio. So I think when you combine all of those things, it just helps creates a kind of a community, a culture, a philosophy that is sort of open, to free thought,
Sure.
and to trying to be sure that everyone, no matter whether you're the CEO of one of these Fortune 500 companies, or you're at a university, or you're a labor union worker, on the floor of the former GM plant, that everybody gets treated equally and respectfully. And I think that's something that's really true of Dayton. I mentioned when we were chatting earlier that I've lived all around Ohio. I've lived in Columbus, Toledo, Cleveland, Cincinnati. And I think Dayton is unique in that combination of factors. And what I have found is the LGBT community here in Dayton, they're not an in-your-face kind of militant, what some people would call militant kind of community. I don't view it as militant, but they are very active, and I think some of it is the size of the community as well. That one of the things that people in the LGBT community realize is that if you want to get something done right and well, and that's sustainable in the Dayton community, you have to work together. We're not a big enough city to be duplicating efforts, to have somebody, or an organization off doing X while somebody's over here also doing X.
Right.
And so I think all of that has created a culture and a community that is very welcoming and respectful and affirming. So I think it's a combination of things that have helped create us into this little blue dot in Ohio, that really rivals any other city in terms of being able to live in an affirming way as an LGBTQ person.
Yep. Now, you mentioned that when you were in graduate school at Wright State, probably about the same time I was, actually, based on age.
I went later.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, we'll pretend.
Well, you're only 29.
I'm only
That's
29.
true, that's
exactly.
true.
So thank you for bringing that back up. I forgot. As a part of, sort of culling this, oral history from people, what has been one of the, and each one of you can answer this, has there been something that, a story that has just stood out that just surprised the crap out of you, just in terms of, for whatever particular reason?
One of my interviews that I did, I interviewed one person that came out in 1960, and he was instrumental in the early LGBT Center and then AIDS Resource Center, and he, in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when people were dying of AIDS, he went to work every day full time, and then at night he said he would just go and hold people's hands while they died, and because their families wanted nothing to do with them. And he mentioned the lesbians being there and working with everybody, but that was just amazing to me. That I mean, I knew it happened. I know it was happening,
Right.
but at the same time, to hear someone say that that's what they did every day.
Well, it's incredibly sobering.
Right.
It's amazing. I mean, it's just it
Right.
really
Yeah.
it's amazing how far we have come
Yeah.
so far. So, any other stories that you've run across, come across?
Well, I know one that personally I think is great, and actually Jerry did the interview for, and he knows what we're talking about. It was a lesbian couple, so I'll let Jerry tell the story because he actually did the interviews on that.
So probably the most interesting story so far is about two African American lesbians who in 1974 went to get a marriage license and were denied here in Dayton, and they sued
Really?
to get a marriage license, yes. And they didn't get a license, but ultimately the court did say that if at that time we had common law marriage, if that's for you, then you can do like everybody else and have common law marriage. So 5 years, just 5 years after Stonewall in Dayton, Ohio, there were two African American lesbians. Their names at the time were Grace Thornton, now Grace Vaughn, and Phyllis Marshall. So Grace now lives in Colorado. She's the person that I've interviewed. And Phyllis lives in Piqua. And I've also interviewed Grace's grandson, Ken Smith. That's how I learned about the story. But that's pretty phenomenal story, because people like to think that marriage equality or the effort toward marriage equality really sort of gained steam or happened in the 90s into the early 2000s, and we didn't get a Supreme Court ruling
Right. that
brought marriage equality nationwide until 2015. But these two women were pushing for this in 1974.
That's astounding, because I do know that there's, what is it, a gay couple in Colorado or something that actually sued
Yeah.
as well, but didn't
Right.
know anything about Dayton.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that was a
1974.
pretty phenomenal story.
Yeah, that's
And we've captured her story.
Yeah.
that's and that's the stuff that.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. Human beings historically, we've always been storytellers in order to pass down from generation to generation, even though stuff changes. I mean, my age continues to drop. Each time I tell my story of my birth, and but no, it's an important facet, to history, and rather than the stale, oh look, here's a history book, we're gonna talk about, we're gonna highlight, the major, whatever, and we're not really gonna talk about how whatever historical trend impacted actual people,
Right.
which is why I'm a fan of Howard Zinn, in terms of people's history of the United States. Whether or not that's all necessarily provable or not, who knows? But still, how did a particular movement at a particular time actually impact real people?
Right.
And that's crucial,
Right.
as far as, how did this, the impact on people is just so super important.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that, young, gaylings, as I will call them, as far as that goes, that, they really, I think they view, in general, older people as suspect all the time. And it's like, hey, guess what? You're looking at the people that made it possible for you to, number one, post your, Snapchat dog face with the pride flag behind you, proud and everything. We didn't have that.
Right.
We paved the way for that.
Right.
Yeah,
Kind of thing.
absolutely.
So respect your elders, kid.
Right.
Yeah.
What I want to say.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then besides stories, we're collecting memorabilia. We were asking
Really?
people to bring memorabilia that they have that they're willing to, and that will be archived.
And
well.
this is going to be housed at Wright State, the archive,
Correct. Right.
as far as that goes.
Some things will be duplicated and kept at the LGBT Center.
Gotcha.
But for professional archiving purposes, so that we can truly preserve a lot of these things for future generations, that'll be out at Wright State.
No, that's very, actually, that's what my master's degree is in, is public history. So I'm a trained archivist. So
Oh.
I actually worked in the,
That's what mine is also.
yeah, gotcha. So it's one of the few public history programs in the nation, actually.
Yeah.
So, Yay, look at that.
Good to know. That's good to know. I didn't know that.
So at any rate, one of the things too is where can people go to find out about your steering committee / group / program?
Well, the easiest way is to just email us at lgbtdaytonhistory@gmail.com. That's the easiest way. We don't have a website at this point, but we are on Facebook, and
Yeah.
it's
Everyone
not
is.
real if it's not on Facebook.
Yeah.
So,
Instagram.
And Instagram, that's right, yes. So you can go to Greater Dayton LGBTQ plus Her History and just search on that in Facebook, and you'll find us. Same on Instagram.
Excellent.
So it's we're pretty easy to find. Again, we are interested in stories and memorabilia about pivotal people, places, and events over the last 50 years or so in the Greater Dayton LGBT community.
Excellent.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
And the plan is to have an award ceremony in October, towards the end of the month. And so you can get that information on the Facebook page as well.
Right.
They'll be awarding those people, places, and events. So we hope it'll be our first inaugural and more to come.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll be right back.
thanks.
Hey, welcome to our continuing series of cooking segments here. I'm Rob Waldron, owner of Catering by Rob, and this is our chef, Chef Bailey McIntosh.
Hello.
Today we're going to show you how to make a really great snack. This is going to be a pulled barbecue chicken slider. And what we do, we add a little coleslaw on top and we put it on a pretzel bun. That gives it the really good kick. So we're going to start off by making a simple coleslaw. Chef Bailey will show you that.
Here's the coleslaw I already have. It's cut up. It's cabbage and carrots, and it's already been cut and ready. So just basically take a handful of that. You don't need a whole lot depending on how many sliders you're going to make. So I'll just put a little bit in here, and I will spoon in a little bit of coleslaw dressing. You can either grab a recipe offline, or you can buy coleslaw dressing of your choice at the store.
And they make several different dressings. They make, you can go to Kroger's, you can get their brand, you can get the Marzetti's brand, you can get the Pine Cub brand.
You can get Kraft.
Yeah, so.
Or you can make your own. And I always like to season it up. A little bit of salt and pepper here. And just about everything that I make, I always put my special seasoning. It's
A little Bailey dust.
You'll see that a lot throughout our segments here. Okay. And then once that's ready, that's the first thing I like to do, because I like to give it enough time so that some of the dressing can soak into the cabbage and the carrots, and so it'll give it a really good flavor.
Okay.
So we'll do that and set that aside.
Right. So the next thing we're going to do the chicken. Actually, the chicken takes a little bit of time, probably about 6 hours, because what you want to do, you want to cook it so well that it just falls apart. So basically, in a crock pot, usually the night before, I just lay out the chicken breast. We turn the crock pot on high for a few hours, and we just let the chicken cook after we season it up and everything. And oh yes, we use the Bailey dust on the chicken also. So basically, now we have the chicken breast. It's already been cooked. So now we're just going to throw it in this bowl here, and we're going to shred it. And basically, by shredding it, we take 2 forks, and we just pull it apart. And we just keep pulling it apart till it comes apart in little strings of chicken. And there we go. If I was at home, I'd be swirling this with my fingers, but since, we want to show you the right way to do it. So after we have the chicken all shredded up, and we'll show you a little bit of that, this chicken's all shredded here, we want to add barbecue sauce. Now again, You know, there are lots of barbecue sauces out there. There, you know, from Sweet Baby Ray's to the generic brands to our personal favorite, Montgomery Inn. So we just take some of that, and we'll just put some barbecue sauce in there,
Or of course you can make your own, and
right?
we
Brown
always,
sugar and
we
all
always
that.
like to doctor it up a little bit anyways, regardless of
Watch.
what kind we get.
A little Bailey dust in there, a little salt and pepper, just to give it a little kick. And we're just going to keep mixing this up.
And while he's mixing that, we take a pretzel bun, and it's really like a roll, so it's not necessarily a bun. So what we do is we just cut them in half, just like so, pretty even.
Now you got a little slider bun.
And then now you have a little slider bun.
I think we're going to need a little bit more barbecue sauce here.
You can never go wrong with too much barbecue sauce.
And one of the things I like to do with my barbecue sauce, believe it or not, a little Coca-Cola and brown sugar gives it a great kick.
Or you can add a little bit of hot sauce to it if you want it to be spicy.
Little hot sauce. Mm-hmm.
Oh, red pepper flakes, depending on what you like. You season it up the way you want.
So now we have that. Now we're going to grab a plate, and I guess we can put a couple of these buns on there. We'll just do the bottoms first. How's that?
Lay out the bottoms on the plate.
Mm-hmm. Let's get this out of the way. And we're going to scoop the barbecue sauce right on there. Or the pulled chicken, I should say.
Make sure you put a
Barbecue
nice
chicken.
amount of chicken on there so you get the flavor.
Yeah, the one thing you don't want is a lot of bread.
Right.
So the more meat,
You don't want
hide
to.
the bread.
Right. You definitely don't want to overpower the chicken because that is the star. The protein, in my opinion, is always going to be the star. So you want to make sure that there is enough on there. That looks great.
Yeah, that's good.
That looks great.
Okay, so now we've done that. We've got the chicken on there.
And is what I like to do is you can either take the top bun or you can just pile it right on top of the chicken. And I use that as kind of a scoop
There you go.
to put that on there.
Here's the other one. There you go.
Right.
Now we've done some variations with this. You know, the health conscious, they love that kale that's going around now. They could make an awesome kale slaw. Give it some Asian flavors. So now you have the barbecue sauce, the sweet, and the Asian flavors of the kale
Nice.
slaw.
And with the kale slaw, I usually use a type of like a poppy seed vinaigrette dressing to mix that with, and I add some, sesame seeds and crunch to it.
And to add a little bit little healthiness here, instead of regular potato chips, we're using some sweet potato chips as our little garnish and something to there. And there you have it. There is a barbecued chicken, pulled chicken slider on a pretzel bun. Let's taste this first.
Okay,
Here we go.
here we go.
Oh, that's good. That's real good. We'll see you next time.
And welcome back. I wanted to thank you all for being on the show and for what you're doing, because this is, I don't think that people appreciate just how truly important, this particular project is, not even just in the Dayton area, but also, nationwide, that stories need to be collected and they need to be housed. So, and again, we'll post information on how people can reach out to you, and thank all of you for watching the show. And if you have any memorabilia or any story, reach out, and you can become a part of Herstory or History. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.